Hi there and welcome to our April user group meeting. We are talking today with Adam Driscoll about PowerShell Universal and PowerShell Pro Tools, two of his products. Just to introduce myself, I'm the host, I'm Konstantin. I do PowerShell on a daily basis and just finished a course today on giving a course to my internal guys about PowerShell. And you can hit me up on Twitter on the two Twitter handles and also get connected on LinkedIn with me if you want. Yeah, then like I said, the session will be recorded. Mute your microphones. We've done that already. Perfect. And I think if you have questions, you can always unmute. I will monitor the chat and ask Adam some questions. And yeah, let's hand it over to our speaker, Adam Driscoll. I think you can introduce yourself, or some people know you already. Chrissy, you had a question? You had a hand up?
I'm so sorry. I pressed the wrong button.
No problem. Okay, so now let us start. Take over, Adam.
All right. Yeah, so my name is Adam Driscoll. I live in Idaho in the United States. I am a PowerShell MVP, and I've been one for about, 7 or 8 years. And I own a software company that's kind of focused all around PowerShell. So we make primarily PowerShell Universal and PowerShell Pro Tools, which is what I'm going to be showing off today. And yeah, just feel free to interrupt with questions and stuff like that. That's fine. I am just going to share my screen. Make sure it's the right one. You're probably all right. So I have a total of 4 slides that I'm going to show. Let's move this out of here. So yeah, I own Ironman Software, and we make PowerShell Universal and PowerShell Pro Tools. PowerShell Universal lets you build web apps with PowerShell. So I'll kind of talk about some of the basic features, and we'll get into some of the new features in our latest release here. And then PowerShell Pro Tools is our other product. It's just a whole bunch of tools. We're going to touch on some of them today, but there's a whole bunch in that suite. And I'll just kind of get into some of the basics of some of our new ones and some of the more popular ones today. So just a little bit about PowerShell Universal. It's kind of broken up into 3 different main feature groups. First is APIs. APIs allow you to take your PowerShell scripts and then create REST APIs with them. So then you can call them from pretty much any system. We actually had a customer that used PowerShell Universal to collect data about their trucks. They were like a trucking company where they actually shipped stuff, and the trucks would report data back to a PowerShell Universal instance, and they were just running on an embedded machine. So that's kind of the cool ability to kind of, take an IoT device almost and consume PowerShell scripts. Then we have an automation section of the product. This is kind of like task scheduler. You can think of it in that way, where you can schedule scripts, you can run scripts, ad hoc. We also have terminals, which are kind of in-browser PowerShell terminals, which I'll show today. And we're going to be getting into kind of scaling out our automation platform. And I'll be talking about our new SQL Server support today that allows you to have multiple PowerShell Universal instances using the same database and scheduling across those instances. Finally, we have user interfaces. So we have a couple different ways of building user interfaces, and I'll be talking about kind of the differences and showing off some of the new features in both of those realms. The user interfaces are actually calling PowerShell script on the back end. Our dashboards actually you author with PowerShell script, so I'll be showing a little bit of that. And then we also have a drag and drop page designer now, where you don't have to write PowerShell script to actually lay out the page, but you can still invoke your PowerShell scripts or consume your PowerShell scripts to generate the data that's shown in the page. So we're going to be going over some demos of that as well. Quick slide about some of the new stuff that's come to PowerShell Universal in the last couple of releases. Some of this is in our V3 beta, which actually came out Tuesday, so still pretty fresh, but there's a lot of cool stuff. First, on our API front, you now can do multiple methods per endpoint. So before you had to create an endpoint per method and per URL, and I'll kind of show you what that means. I'll give you a demo of this. But now you can kind of group those together, so we're kind of reducing the amount of endpoints you need to generate. And you'll be able to use multiple API environments, which means that you could run APIs in Windows PowerShell, PowerShell 7, and PowerShell 6 if you wanted to, all with the same PowerShell Universal server. So kind of all of the features inside PowerShell Universal allow you to interface with different versions of PowerShell. In the automation section, we've added terminals, which I talked about a little bit, where they're in-browser terminals that you can execute PowerShell scripts, and then scalable job runners, which is our SQL Server support, meaning that you can have multiple PowerShell Universal instances talking to the same SQL Server database. In the user interface section, we've added the drag and drop page designer. So I'll show that off today. Just it's much quicker to make UIs. They're not quite as customizable, but they're much easier to get started. We've upgraded the Material UI, which is the UI framework used for dashboards, to the newest version, which means that we get a bunch of new components and some new styling features and that kind of thing. Plus, it's supported by the Material UI team, so that's good. And in the platform side of things, we've added SQL Server support. We've added live log views, which I'll show you in a little bit, which means you'll be able to see kind of what's happening inside your PowerShell Universal instance in real time, similar to what you'd see in like Azure functions. We've added secret scope. Secret scope is used for accessing secrets directly in your PowerShell scripts without having to like interface directly with a SecretManagement solution. We actually have that built in. And then finally, a repository editor, which I'll talk about a little bit. One of the core like concepts of PowerShell Universal is that everything is configured with PowerShell. So the repository editor actually allows you to view and edit all the configuration files directly in the browser. So I'll show you guys what that looks like, yeah, in the demo, which I'm going to do right now. All right, so I have PowerShell Universal running on localhost 5000. I'm just running this as a console app. You can also install it like a crazy amount of ways. You can host it in Azure, IIS, install as a Windows service. It runs in Docker containers. It's cross-platform. So I literally just have a console app that's running PowerShell Universal right now. And I'm just going to log in with the default username and password. I am running the current 3.0 beta 2 release. This is the release that we have on our website for the current beta. We also have 2.10, which is our LTS version that is also available. So some of the features I'm showing off today are only available in 3.0. So on the left-hand side, you're going to see things like the feature groups that I was talking about: APIs, automation, user interfaces. We have a lot of platform settings, some general like server settings, that kind of thing, and then our security settings. So I'm just going to go through some of the new features in this and do some demos. So first of all, we'll look at APIs. So we have a new little API layout here, which is a folder view, which allows you to kind of group your APIs by folder. It needs a little polish still in this beta version, but if you had multiple entity APIs, they would all appear underneath this folder, and it just kind of automatically generates those based on URL. Another new feature is this ability to have multiple methods per API. So you can see here I have get, post, and delete for the entity method. In 2.0, you'd have to create 3 endpoints, 1 for each method. Then when you kind of are authoring an API, you can see here that on the left we have PowerShell script, and all that's really doing is calling writehouse to print out the method, and then it's returning the method back to the user. So whoever invokes this is just going to get the method back. So if I were to actually open up a PowerShell prompt, I can grab this invoke method or REST method call and put it in there, and it's going to actually invoke that REST API. So it went up, it called that API, and then it just printed the method back to me. So if I actually change this to post, it's still going to work because we now support those multiple methods. The other cool thing that you're going to notice in here is our live log view. So this is actually like a feature of Azure functions, and I was like, wow, we really need to do that. And if you invoke the REST method now, you'll see on the right-hand side that it's just going to print out some information about that API call. So this is like super useful for logging. Before you kind of had to like write your own logging or debugging, like put a an out file in there or something to see what's coming in and out. But now you'll see that the first thing that's listed is the method that was called, the URL that was called. This is actually the IP address that's calling it. Since I'm on a localhost, it's the loopback address. And then anything like write host, write error, warnings, verbose, or debug will actually show up in the log as well. So since I used write host, it's actually printing that into the log. And then finally, it's going to show you what was returned from your API call. So the SAS code was 200, the content type was application JSON, and it had a length of 4 bytes because I returned the method, which was 4 bytes. So it might not seem like a lot, but that is like a very helpful feature for API development. And we've put this live log view in a couple other places. You can actually see the server logs as well as authentication and authentication and authorization scripts as well. All right, so let's pop over to the automation section. So I have a couple scripts. These are just some basic like get service script, just calls get service. I have this other script that makes food that we'll show in a little bit. I actually have that hooked up into a UI. The other thing that you may not have played with yet is terminals. And this is, I mentioned this a couple times. This is the idea that you can have an in-browser PowerShell terminal where you can execute PowerShell commands in various environments. So you create like kind of a new terminal environment. In this case, I'm using a Windows PowerShell 5.1 environment. And then you can create terminal instances based on that environment. So if I actually click this open terminal, what it's going to do in the background is it's going to create a Windows PowerShell process. And now I have just an in-browser terminal where I can execute commands. So if I do PS version table, you'll see that it's running in that PowerShell, Windows PowerShell process. If you actually go back to terminals, you can actually see that there are instances. So there's a couple other times that I had open and close terminals. It'll have the start time and that kind of thing. And since I'm still connected to this admin console session, the WebSocket between my terminal is still open, so it still is listed as connected. And I can actually go and pop back into that terminal. And the terminals actually kind of retain state and everything like that. So you could pop in and out of your terminals, set commands, and check what's going on. So we do have some plans for like enhancing this a little bit. Like right now, kind of what you see is what's happening, but kind of in the works are history. So you'd be able to come in and see the terminal instances and then see what commands were executed and kind of what was returned by those commands. So there you have a little auditing going on there. The other thing that we want to add is kind of a GIA-based, just enough administration-based concept in here so that you could limit what commands are actually run inside a terminal. Because the only thing with terminals right now is you have to be an admin user and you can pretty much execute whatever you want in the terminal, which you don't really want to give that to your regular non-admin users or that kind of thing. So we're looking for adding a little more control and auditing to terminals. But yeah, kind of looking for feedback there and see if people actually need that.
So just a question, Adam,
Yep.
on the terminal stuff. So you have to be an admin in the role concept of Universal to use terminals, or do you have to be a local admin on the machine, or what?
Just an admin in terms of PowerShell Universal. So you don't have to be a local admin on the machine. It's running under the context of the PowerShell Universal server. And when you create it, you can actually specify the credentials. So technically you could delegate to another credential if you wanted to. And then you can set up, a couple different environments and that kind of thing. I think our first step will be like terminals with roles, but the fact that you can still run any PowerShell command is kind of like, I don't know. There's not enough control there for us to like open it up to anyone to run stuff. So
yeah, that was a concern of one of my customers, because if you get access to that interface and you get the admin password, you can possibly run any command with this stuff,
right,
and manipulate the server. So so one of my customers asked, can we switch that off? And I said, oh, I think not.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we could make it so that, because one thing that's starting to happen with PowerShell Universal is there's just so much stuff in here, and I think what could benefit in terms of not only like usability but also like kind of attack surface is just having feature flags, like I only want APIs on or something, you know, and then just hide all that other stuff and disable all that functionality in the server. So I'll take that as some feedback. I think that's probably something we should probably implement.
So Chrissy, you have a question?
I do. Because you're able to add credentials, does this take care of double hop if I want to go to a different server?
It does, because we're storing those credentials in a credential manager, and you're pretty much plain texting those credentials. It's not like it's not like with a WinRM connection where you have just like a hash inside that second hop. So technically you could store the credentials in the credential manager. Then that connection itself is not a double hop, it's a single hop from there. So that's why it's technically not doing a secondary hop, I guess. So
excellent. So I shouldn't run into any Kerberos problems if I want to execute against like a bunch of remote commands. A bunch of remote servers.
Nope, because you'll authenticate against pretty much the website itself, and then the server in the back end is running and then doing that authentication. So yeah.
Sweet, thank you.
And talking about feature flags, I think you had that implemented in an earlier version of a version 1 or so. But I saw it in the options that you can switch stuff on and off. That was some kind of feature flagging, I think.
Yeah, we had like a plugins concept for a while there, where you could like remove plugins and that kind of thing, but it got really hard to maintain. So I think there's actually libraries built just for feature flags that I would probably use to like, because I would want to do more than just hide the UI. I'd want to like actually turn off everything in the server too. So yeah.
But the Gia concept will always will also be an exciting thing, because if you can say, okay, call the terminal instance with endpoint X or so, where it is restricted, that's also cool stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I got to think about how to do that exactly. It's like I don't really necessarily want to re-implement Gia completely, but Gia only works on Windows. So being a cross-platform product, we got to think that through a little bit. Yeah. All right.
Okay, thank you, Pepper.
Sorry, say again?
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, no problem. All right, I'm going to get into user interfaces. I want to talk a little bit about the differences here, and then talk about kind of like where we're looking future. Because right now, I think as a new user coming in here, or even like a user that's used this for a while, they're like, why are there 2 ways to do this? And I think it's because we're kind of in this transition period. So first of all, I'll talk a little bit about dashboards and what a dashboard is, and then we'll get into pages, and then I'll kind of talk about what we're planning here. So dashboards are kind of how PowerShell Universal started. It used to be just Universal Dashboard before we had this nice UI and everything like that. And the idea is that, we have this, oops, wrong button. We have this script here that generates a user interface, and we have all these commandlets that are based on things like expansion panels and forms and transitions. And I think we have, over 50 or 60 controls now. We kind of use the material UI library to generate these, and then the interfaces with PowerShell so you can execute your PowerShell scripts. So we definitely, we still support all this stuff, and you can come in here and you can actually edit it directly inside the code editor. So we've added a bunch of stuff to make it a little bit better. We have IntelliSense now. We have things like code formatting. So if you hit F8, it'll actually format it with PSScriptAnalyzer and that kind of thing. We even have like stuff to check for errors, so you can actually see that kind of thing. What's kind of nice is this is using the Monaco editor, which is the same thing that VSCode kind of uses. So similar experience. But that said, you're still authoring all your PowerShell script to generate your UI. And I'll get into how we're trying to make that a little bit easier with pages, but I kind of want to talk through what we've done in Universal Dashboard for PSU v3 and show you some of the new features first. So Dashboards are extremely customizable, as you can imagine. You can pretty much author all this PowerShell script and it generates a web page. This particular dashboard looks like this. So it's very simple. I just have a couple expansion panels and I'm gonna show off some of the new controls we've added in PSU v3. You know, by default, it has theming and a dark theme built in. You can actually customize all the colors, add images, you know, do your own custom navigation and headers and that kind of thing. Being just a script, it kind of allows you to just kind of go crazy and build whatever you want. And I've seen some very, very complex dashboards that do some really cool things. But we're trying to simplify that a little bit. I'll get into that in just a bit, but I'm going to show off some of the cool features in our new version of PowerShell Universal Dashboard. So first of all, we've upgraded to the new version of Material UI. It looks slightly nicer, and it does have some things that we aren't quite exposing in PowerShell Universal Dashboard yet, around theming and that kind of thing. But some of the things that we have added are some new controls that they provided. The first one is a form. So this may not seem that cool, but it's cool based on how it's built. So rather than kind of how you build forms in Universal Dashboard now, where you have to put a text box in and then you put another text box in and then you have to like do all this validation yourself, we actually added this library that does a schema-based forms. So instead of defining kind of the controls, you're defining the form itself as a hash table. So I have two properties. One is a number and one is a string. It's going to return an object back to me that I can then use in my onSubmit. The library we're using actually has all kinds of like validation stuff you can put in. You can actually have dependencies where if you select one form item, it automatically will add another form item, that kind of thing. Or depending on what you select in a select, it might hide or show something, and you can, you know, require certain properties and all that kind of stuff. So the idea being that you don't have to build all that logic yourself. So this is a very simple example, but based on this hash table here, it's actually generating this form. And you can see, like, I can't type characters in here. I can only type numbers because it's a number form, and I can type text in here. And it kind of behaves the same way as a current PowerShell Universal form, where you click it and now it's executing some PowerShell. So when I'm clicking this, it's actually executing this Show-PSEditor toast down here to just get that data that I entered into the form and then toast it up so that you can kind of see what's happening. But in that onSubmit, you could call any PowerShell command that you want that's available to, you know, this PowerShell Universal instance. So I think the schema forms are cool. I think it's going to save some people some time trying to build out some really complex forms, and you kind of get into some weird states with when you're like adding and removing controls yourself and all that kind of thing. So this should make it a little simpler. Another component we've added is a timeline component. So this is just a new Material UI component, and it was pretty simple to add. It kind of allows you to, you know, create a timeline. You can customize things like you can see the time is alternating, either or. There's colors for the different dots. You can actually put icons instead of dots and that kind of thing. The idea being that you could just create these timelines, and that is actually generated with the new UD timeline commandlet. And you can actually put anything in these contents. So right now I just have text, but I could put buttons or links or, you know, whatever. Like if I wanted this to actually go link out to what the welcome message was for, you know, PowerShell and DevOps Summit, I could just, you know, have it pop up a modal or something. So I think it's a neat little component. We also added badges. So a badge is just this little 4 on this icon. These are actually 2 components. The badge can have all these like properties like colors and, you know, do we display a 0 or what's our max value and that kind of thing. So where you typically see these are like in like, you know, notification areas like up here and that kind of thing, where, you know, there's something that you need to look at for, and if you click this icon, then it will, you know, display that. So that's just generated of the new UD badge commandlet. We have upgraded to Font Awesome 6, which is the most recent version of the font library we use for PowerShell Universal Dashboard. And we've actually added the most handy commandlet in the entire Universal Dashboard is find UD icon. So like you can just you can find icons, which was really annoying before. You had to like go to the Font Awesome website and try to get the icon name correctly and everything. But this just, you type find UD icon, you can put in a partial name to an icon. And for example, if I search for user, it's just going to give me all the things that have user in it. So it makes finding icons much easier. Yeah, so as you can see, it's displaying the icon and then putting the icon name. And I built that with just this little UD form here where I enter my icon and then I call find icon and then I just loop through all the icons that were returned and create a new list icon or list item with that icon and a label for that icon. So yeah,
that's some questions on the icons. So I developed a dashboard where I use icons, and I also looked at the Font Awesome site. And I read through your documentation, and you're saying you are changing some icon names because they are not perfectly aligning with the names that you are getting on Font Awesome site. And also, it was very tricky to find which icons were supported. I find a gist where you had a list of the items, the icons. And my main question is, why don't you have all the icons implemented in Universal?
We don't have any of the pro icons is one of the problems.
Okay.
Yeah, and they have added a lot more pro icons. It used to be just free, and then they added all these pro icons. And by version 6, I want to say there's probably more pro icons than there are standard icons. So I think that is the main problem. That was always my problem. The other problem that we have is that the way the icons are represented in the React libraries that we use are different than they are displayed on the Font Awesome website. So you have to like formulate the name properly. That's why we just wanted to add this like find UD icon thing. So it's like, here's all the icons that are available. You can just search for icons. You don't have to like try to like figure it out. So, and we will have a list because now we're auto-generating the list of icons and storing them in text files. That's what we actually ship with the product. So I actually have a gist of it right now, but I'm going to put it in the docs so that you could just go to the docs and just hit, Control F and find an icon. So
yeah, that's the thing that I found in 2 or 3 links deeper. I find your gist that you are created 3 months ago or so, and then I had a chance to find the thing or if the icon is there and so on. Yeah.
You know what? How about after this call, I'll update the docs with all those icons.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, so that's icons. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up was one problem we've had with the Universal Dashboard, like ever since it was built, was that if you have like a React error, like a JavaScript error happen on the page, you just get a white page, which can happen for lots of reasons. Like, you configured a built-in control in a way that we didn't test, and it breaks the page, and then you just have this white page. But what we've implemented now is better error handling. So in this beta version, the transition component is broken. And you can see I put a transition component inside this thing, and it doesn't break the whole page. It only breaks the transition component. So I think as a user that is just coming to Universal Dashboard, you're like, yeah, it should work that way. But as like someone that's probably used this for a long time, it's like, oh, wow, finally. So this will actually, if you copy these error details, it includes all the JavaScript information that you can just send to us and we can look at it. So I think that's useful for both, I said built-in stuff as well as third-party components that you may be using. So it was a little feature, but I'm glad it's been added. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about pages. So pages are another way of making UIs. It's a simpler way of making UIs, and it's kind of the way that we want to move forward a little bit in terms of how UIs are produced inside PowerShell Universal. And I'll talk a little bit about, I have an example of how we're starting to integrate dashboards into pages in this. So with a page, it looks very similar. We have this like custom UI I built here. And in this case, I have some services. I have this little alert box up here. I have multiple pages, so you can see I have a form. I have charts that I can put in here. But what's cool about Pages is that it's actually all visual rather than having to write all that PowerShell script yourself. So I can actually move these charts around and stuff. I can actually like hit the properties of the chart, and you can look at things like where I'm getting this data from. So this chart is actually calling a PowerShell Universal API. So we actually have little drop downs here that let you select which API you want to load that data from, and then it'll just generate this chart for you. On the right hand side, you'll see things like this toolbox. So I can actually add additional components if I wanted to. So like if I wanted to add an alert to this page, I could do that. I could update the text. I could like change the type of it. And you don't have to like relearn a bunch of PowerShell commandlets to do this stuff. You just kind of generate these pages. And then once I save it, it's actually going to kind of make that sticky. And you can see now I just have this page set up. So yeah, charts, you can, collect data from a server. Oops. You can also collect data from scripts. So in this table, I'm actually using a script, the get service script that I showed before, where it's just calling get service to generate this table. So it just gets the last time this script was run, and you can specify the name and column, or the names for the columns, and customize what's in the columns, that kind of thing. And then it'll create a table for you. So finally, not only can you like consume data in Pages, but you can also run scripts. So I showed that like run script before. I think it just actually literally called run script or something. And it actually, it has a parameter that it accepts. It outputs some progress, and then eventually it will output what the script has, completed and done. So I'm Adam. I'm gonna see. You can see it's like responding to feedback because I have a read host in my script. I'll show the script again in a second. And then I'm gonna get some pizza, and now it's preparing my pizza. You can see there's a progress bar. And then once it finishes, it's going to give you the output. So you can see that it gave me some information about my pizza, how many carbs, and this is a very caloric pizza and that kind of thing. So what's cool about that is I didn't have to write anything PowerShell script, right? I didn't have to I didn't have to know what new uniform was and do any of that kind of stuff. My script itself is actually just like a pretty standard PowerShell script. I don't do any, PowerShell Universal specific things in here. I'm just using write host, read host, write progress, and then I'm outputting a hash table. And that's what produced this form. So that's kind of the idea with Pages, that we're trying to make it easier to integrate with your PowerShell scripts without having to learn an entire PowerShell like framework just to build UIs. So that said, Pages are definitely not as customizable or dynamic as dashboards are. So there's definitely going to be a place for dashboards. And where we're kind of heading with that is we hope to make it so that you can do something like this. So here's an example of that dashboard that I was showing before with the different examples in it. And it's actually embedded in the page. And you can actually, resize it, move it around and that kind of thing. And yeah, it's just going to load it directly in there. And kind of the idea is where we're headed, hopefully, is that dashboards will become this idea of like creating interactive components, and then you can drag them around in this page interface. So if you want a complex component like, a schema form, or you want to build out a stepper control or something like that, you would actually generate, rather than a whole dashboard, you would generate like a function that defines that component. So like this is my new user onboarding wizard. And then you could just plop that in a page and kind of move it around and then have other controls and that kind of thing without having to lay all that out just in dashboard scripts. So kind of the problem with this right now is that this doesn't really interact with the rest of the page. It's actually kind of hosted in its own iframe, but it's kind of our first step in making this happen, because eventually what we'll have is like multiple controls and they can communicate with each other. So this does, though, just behave like the regular dashboard, and you can see that things pop up and everything, but it's all kind of contained within that page, and we want to kind of elevate it out of there so it's kind of more a part of the page interface. So that's kind of where we're going with this, just so that, you know, you kind of have an idea. We're not going to get rid of dashboards or anything. The whole dashboard framework is still going to be there, but we want to, you know, provide the opportunity to make it a little bit easier to approach rather than having to author everything in a dashboard script, and then you end up with these like 2,000 line dashboard scripts that are hard to debug and that kind of thing. So yeah, so that's kind of the idea there. The last thing, because I'm kind of running a little long on this section, is I want to show off the SQL Server support. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stop this PowerShell Universal instance, and then I'm going to pop into here, and I have this. So what this is going to do is it's going to start PowerShell Universal twice on the same box. So you could be running these on different boxes. I have two different like settings files, which are these app settings files. One of them is listening on port 5000. The other one is listening on port 5001. And they are both using the SQL plugin and have their connection string set to my local DB called PSU v3. You don't have to worry about this too much. Our new installer actually has a lot of these settings. So if you're running the MSI, you can just kind of punch that in as it's setting up. But if I go back to this guy and run that, you're going to see two PowerShell Universal instances start up. And once those are connected, what we can actually do is come back here. And if I refresh this, you'll see that it's prompting me. And now everything looks the same. I still have this script. One thing you're going to notice is different is that like the jobs that I ran are different, because now we're getting that out of the SQL database, not the local file database. And if I were to actually go to 5001, you can see I log in again, because that's my other PowerShell Universal instance. I have both of them running on the same place, and you're going to see the same job there because they are actually both talking to the same database. And if we actually pop over to SQL Management Studio and take a look at like the job table, for example, you're going to see that that job data is just stored inside SQL now. So that allows us to kind of scale out and, you know, have redundancy with our PowerShell Universal instances. The other thing that we benefit from is that we actually use this kind of job execution engine called Hangfire. So Hangfire actually is what runs all the jobs in PowerShell Universal, and it automatically integrates with SQL Server and supports multiple agents. So I don't know why there's 4 servers listed usually, but it should be 2, but they still have the same name. So I don't know if that's just like a UI thing or not, but you can see that we have our 2 servers listed. They're both on the same machine and they have like an ID after them. If you had servers on different machines, you'd have different, different ID or user or computer names here with IDs. And then what you can see is that when you run jobs in here, it's only going to be running with, under one server. It's not going to be multiple servers running those jobs. I'll actually run a job just to show you. Let's do this one. It's going to pick one of those servers. It's going to run it, and it's going to store that job information in SQL. And then I think if we look in here again, you can see this, and this ran on one of the servers. So you could potentially have, 50 servers talking to the same SQL Server database. So we are looking into things like queues and tagging agents and that kind of thing, so that you can kind of like decide which server or group of servers to run it on and that kind of stuff. But in this initial version, we just kind of wanted redundancy and kind of horizontal scaling, which is what this is going to provide for us. All right. So I think, the one other thing I wanted to show was the repository editor, just because for people that have been working with PowerShell Universal, this will be nice. One of the problems with PowerShell Universal 2 is that we do have like a configuration editor, but it only looks at this folder, this is the Universal folder, and it only looks at certain files in here. So if you add other files, it won't have them. But with V3, we now have this repository editor where you can actually look at all the files in your repository, including ones we didn't surface before. And Yeah, so it kind of gives you an idea too of how this configuration works. You can see that everything's kind of configured with either a PS1 file or, in the case of pages, an XML file. And you can actually edit these files or sync them to GitHub or Git or any Git repository, and then do pull requests to GitHub, and PowerShell Universal will pull these files back down and reconfigure itself. So that's kind of the idea of why we do file-based configuration, is because you don't really necessarily need a database to back up to stand up a new version or new instance of PowerShell Universal to have the same configuration. So yeah, so you can just kind of see all the things that we were kind of working through listed here. Cool. So I think that's kind of all I wanted to talk about with PowerShell Universal. So unless there's any questions, I'll transition over to some demos of PowerShell Pro Tools.
Are there any questions? Because I should say I used the new debugging experience that you built. Because you have enhanced it. You just put write debugger in, and then we have this debugging stuff, and the session will come over, and you can enter the process and start debugging variables. So that's really cool thing that you built, and I think
thanks.
2 or 3 versions before. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of those things I wasn't sure if people are going to use. Some people are like, I never used the debugger, even regular PowerShell, but I found this useful for me. So
yeah, it's very useful. I have a very big dashboard and wanted to look how one variable was set, or so, or return value of an API that I use was very helpful because that value was wrong, and this
cool
mechanism I can see that, so it's very helpful.
Cool. Well, I'm glad I built it then. If it at least helped you, that's good.
Perfect.
All right. Let's stop.
Any other questions for Adam with PowerShell Universal?
I have a question on the schema forms. When you showed the schema forms, there were 2 properties, age and name. And if I saw it correctly, in the source code, there was first the field name and then age, but in the UI there was age first and name as a second field. Can you can you fix this by passing the properties as an ordered hash table, or?
I think so. What we're with the whole schema form thing, pretty much what's happening is we're using this library called React JSON schema or something. So we take that hash table and turn it into a JSON string, which we pass to that library. So that library has features for ordering and like changing the UI and stuff, but you pretty much need to put those properties in there. So we got to like flesh out the docs a little bit better, but their doc site actually provides examples. They're just in JSON rather than hash tables. So the reason it ordered it alphabetically is just that's their default setting, but you can pass additional properties to the hash table to order it however you want. So
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Other questions? Okay, then I think you can start with PowerShell Pro Tools.
Okay, cool. So there's a lot in PowerShell Pro Tools, so I'm not going to be going through everything today. I'm going to go just kind of through some of the new stuff that we've added, some of the stuff that's most popular, that kind of thing. But I just want to give you a little overview of like some of the features that it has. We integrate with Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio. The experience there is similar. There's actually more features in Visual Studio Code than Visual Studio, but kind of the concept is, we have things like form designers and packaging PowerShell scripts into executables and refactoring tools. And that kind of thing inside the editors to kind of make it a little bit better PowerShell experience. We also have a tool called PSScriptPad. This actually started out as our form designer that we used in Visual Studio Code, but it's kind of grown into its own little tiny PowerShell editor, so I'll show that off a little bit today. We also have PowerShell Protect, which is an AMSI provider, which is an anti-malware scan interface provider. It's kind of what Defender uses, and actually PowerShell implements it where it finds suspicious scripts. Like if you were to try to run like a highly obfuscated script, the AMSI provider would kick in and block that script or log that script. So PowerShell Protect allows you to actually create your own like rules for AMSI, and you can block things like certain users or domains or computers from running scripts. It also does auditing, like you can send requests to an HTTP server if something happens on a server, or a TCP server, like if you have a SIM or something like that. PS Commander is a Windows like desktop automation tool. So you can hook up like hotkeys and shortcuts and custom protocol handlers to execute PowerShell scripts. And it really integrates with a bunch of different things inside Windows. It also does like persistent WMI events will execute your PS Commander things, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's just a little PowerShell module you can download. And then we have PowerShell Pro Tools, which includes some of the features that are included in our Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio offerings, like packaging PowerShell scripts into executables. It also has commandlets for creating MSIs, and it has a new editor commandlet that I will show off today. So I'm going to go through.
Adam, just a question before. Yeah. Do you have an issue page for PowerShell Pro Tools, open source issue page?
Yeah, we use the same issue page for both PowerShell Pro Tools and PowerShell Universal, and we just have tags for either one. So.
Okay, because I think I already found an issue, so I don't know where to file it. So yeah.
Yeah.
So I will file it later.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to show off primarily PowerShell Pro Tools for Visual Studio Code, just because I think that's what most people are using for PowerShell development these days. And there's an extension that you can install just called PowerShell Pro Tools. Once you get that installed, you're actually going to have this PowerShell Pro Tools icon on the left-hand side. And we have like a bunch of, they call this the activity pane, and we have a bunch of like little tools here to show you what's going on inside your like PowerShell environment inside Visual Studio Code. For example, if I were to open a script, you'll see things like the AST. I don't know why that didn't work. Oh wait, there we go. You can look through things like the AST and actually highlight different parts of the script to see what part of the AST it is. We have things like history, so this is just calling get history, and you can actually I think if you click this, it's going to put it in the terminal. So it's actually putting those in the terminal. Host processes. So this is kind of a debugging thing. You can see, like, for example, PowerShell Universal is actually running, and it has PowerShell running in it. And if you were to expand this, it's going to show all the run spaces that are currently inside PowerShell Universal. And you can actually click this run space or attach to run space button, and it'll start debugging that particular run space. So it's actually kind of a good way to, like, if you did have a script in PowerShell Universal, you'd be able to like hook to it right in Visual Studio Code. So it's not doing anything too crazy except executing commands like enter PS host process and debug run space and that kind of thing. This will list jobs if you run any like jobs with start job. We have modules. So by default, it just kind of lists all the modules. You can also turn on the ability for it to check to see if there's updates to modules. It's a little slow because it uses the PowerShell gallery to like check each module. So that's why it's off by default. We have access to providers. So for example, if you wanted to look in, I don't know, file system provider, you could start to drill down in there, or the environment provider. And we have things like inserting that into your script, so you don't have to type it all out, especially if you're in like a big nested path or something. Turn this on.
Can you search in that view also?
You can't search in it right now, no, but that's a good idea. I never really thought about that before.
Especially for providers, if they are, because they are they can get very big.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good idea. I will open a. That's another thing you can put in the issue tracker if you wanted. We have some reflection stuff. So this actually looks at all the things that are currently loaded into your PowerShell session, and you can actually drill down into the like namespaces and classes in here. And we integrate with I don't remember what the library is, but it will actually go through and decompile the type. So if you did have like, you know, some sort of commandlet that you wanted to see how it worked internally, you could actually decompile the types with just a click, and it'll print it out to, you know, a CS file pretty much. We integrate with any sessions you may have open, and then everyone's favorite is always the variable view, because the only time you have a variable view right now is if you're in the debugger. But this variable view is live, and it's updated every time you execute something in PowerShell, so you can actually drill down into your variables inside your PowerShell session and actually insert those variables along with their whole path pretty much into your scripts if you select it. So some of the other like really popular things, I think our most popular thing is always the form designer. So I have a form here. You can actually just open or create an empty PS1 file, and it will generate this code. And you can click this Show Form Designer button here, and what it's going to actually do, oh, you can't see it, but it says show, oh no, not digitally signed. So we have this form designer open. So this is PSScriptPad, and PSScriptPad originally started out as just a form designer, and it has since, I don't know what happened there. There we go. It has since kind of evolved into its own PowerShell editor, just because it was kind of weird to jump back and forth all the time if you just wanted to, you know, build forms. So it actually has like IntelliSense, and you can execute code in here. But it also has a WinForm designer. So on the left-hand side, you'll see all your properties for your controls. And if you go to the toolbox, you can actually, you know, add new controls to your form. And then save it. And if I were to go to this form.ps1, this actually kicks off that form. It's loading a designer.ps1 file, which it just contains all the designer code for that. I can show you that in a second in VSCode. And if I were to run this, you're going to see my form pop up. And since I hooked up that button click, if I click this, it's going to go, ouch. And what that's actually doing is, if you go back to here.
Is cross-platform usable, Adam, or is it only
no? It's
Windows?
Just Windows. Yeah,
it's just Windows. Okay.
Yeah. I've been racking my brain at the best way to make a cross-platform like form designer, but right now the UI like landscape for .NET is so fragmented. There's just I don't think Microsoft has decided what their like UI framework is cross-platform. So.
And maybe .NET MAUI.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I noticed I was looking at MAUI, and what I realized the other day is it doesn't support Linux, which is weird. Like,
okay.
It does like Android, Mac, and Windows, but it doesn't support Linux. And then there's like Avalonia, which supports everything, but it's not driven by Microsoft, which is an open source thing. And then there's WinUI, which is only Windows, and it's like Windows Store apps pretty much. So it's like, I don't know. I want them to make up their mind before I choose something. So, so this is kind of the designer code that is generated. It's just PowerShell script code. So, yeah, unlike like Sapien has, you know, obviously a similar thing, but they like store everything in PSF files that you can't really take apart, but you can export them, and it looks like this. So we just store everything as a PS1 file. The other big thing people typically use PowerShell Pro tools for is packaging. So we have a whole packaging solution that in VS Code is driven by this package.ps1 file, which is just more or less a hash table that contains a bunch of different options that you can use to actually package your forms or any PowerShell script. And by default, if you were to like click this PowerShell script and then click this little package script as exe button up in the top right, it's actually going to generate that package.ps1 file, and you can click that, and it's actually going to generate the exe. So yeah, what did I do here? What do we package in like? So in this case, I'm actually packaging for PowerShell 7 using .NET 6. So this type of packaging actually is a little different than like standard PowerShell script packaging, because what it's doing is it's actually including the entire PowerShell SDK and .NET runtime in your exe. So what that does is it's a pretty big exe, but it also is completely portable. So you don't need PowerShell 7 installed on any machine that you put this on. It's all contained within that .exe. So then you could just actually go out form.exe, and it's going to run this .NET Core exe. And you can see that we are, we have our form and, our event handlers work and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's completely self-contained. The one downside is that it's about 200 megabytes. So, because it's got the .NET Runtime, PowerShell SDK, all the built-in modules and that kind of thing. So we're investigating how to shrink that either with shared runtime or discovering the PowerShell if PowerShell 7 is installed by default.
Just a question.
Yeah.
Do you have to have .NET SDK, because I think you are using .NET pack or build or so? Do you need to have anything, any dependencies to use this thing?
Yep. For the packaging itself, you need the .NET SDK installed.
Yeah.
So
okay.
You don't need it on the target machine, but you need it on this machine that you're actually running this on. So,
just to make that clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. And if you don't have it installed, you'll get a little error message with links and everything. I think we just added, I don't know, part of me is like, oh, we should just install the dependencies, but like installing stuff on people's machines unexpectedly is always kind of so maybe we'll add a commandlet for that, because they actually have a PowerShell script that you can like invoke that just installs .NET Core, and you don't have to like go to any websites. But yeah, so I want it to be very clear that that is happening.
Are you also able to build the executable for all the OSs? So
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, you can actually change. I don't remember what the actual. We have like the schema for this defined our docs, but you can actually set the OS, and we support. We support Linux and Mac, so you definitely can build for both of those. So. Yeah, which is kind of cool because that's portable too. And if you take it over to a Linux machine that doesn't have PowerShell installed on it, you can actually run the executable there. So, and this works. This particular packaging works from Linux too. So if you have a Linux machine with VSCode and the .NET SDK installed, you can actually run the packaging on there too. So, yeah, it's like end-to-end. Cross-platform, unless you want to do like .NET or Windows PowerShell, which is what this would do. So .NET version 4.6.2. If I ran the packaging again, this will actually produce a much smaller executable because it's actually just packaging for Windows PowerShell. So if I were to actually run that exe, how I can tell is if it's a different, older looking icon, then it's running in Windows PowerShell. So. Yep. So that's what that's doing. But yeah, there's lots of options. We support like packaging for console apps. You can hide the console. You can require elevation. You can obfuscate it. You can create services, that kind of thing. So a bunch of cool stuff that we can do in there. And yeah, we're kind of investigating how to make PowerShell 7 exes smaller, because yeah, I think by default, like all I packaged in here were like 3 or 4 scripts, and it's about 200 megabytes, so pretty big. One other feature I wanted to show, just because I think it's neat. I never really hear much feedback about it, but I spent a bunch of time building out these cool refactoring tools. It's like a big thing in like C# world, especially the ReSharper was always like a big tool for people, and they've kind of added a bunch of that stuff directly into Visual Studio. So we thought we should do that for PowerShell scripts. And kind of what it does is it looks at the PowerShell script, and then it suggests things that you can do to like the current highlighted line. And that's what this little like light bulb is suggesting. So I think it's control dot, or you can click the light bulb. And these are like refactorings that will adjust your code based on what you select. So for example, if I do use parameter splatting, it's going to turn my command into a splat. And I noticed this when I was creating the demo, but switch parameters are broken because it didn't add load user profile there, but I'll get that fixed. So that's an example of one type of refactoring. Another one that I really like is generate function from usage. So imagine start process doesn't exist and you've like typed this whole thing out. Rather than having to like generate the function and the param block and everything like that, you can actually click this and say generate function from usage, and it's going to create a function and create the param block for you, and then you can just kind of fill in the details of what that function looks like. So I think we have like 30 refactorings. There's like all kinds of stuff like extracting, functions to other files and renaming variables and that kind of thing. The other thing that's kind of cool is you can, I don't remember how to do this now. Never mind. If I could remember, you can actually reorder your parameters just with like keystrokes. That's part of our refactoring stuff. So yeah, that's kind of just like an editor thing that we kind of offer. So this works in both Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code, but not PSScriptPad. All right. So
the splatting feature is one of the best refactorings that I use. Before you have to use editor services command suite and to have that, it's really a cool feature. So it's the most refactoring that I use after building functions and exporting them to files and so on.
Okay,
really nice.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I'm always trying to think of new refactorings. Whenever I like find myself doing stuff a bunch, I'm like, all right, there should be a refactoring for this, So yeah, so we actually have like this whole
I also that is what I open an issue for. If you have a pipeline, so if you say command X pipe to command Z, and command Z is has very much parameters, and you do splatting in there, then it can get a bit wonky, especially when you do it when you assign it to a variable, then it can be broken. So I have to look the scenario, and I will
let me know. Yeah,
an issue about
it's not even like giving me the option, which is weird.
Yeah.
Like pipeline.
The pipeline is also cool stuff.
Yeah, let me know.
Yeah.
All right. So that kind of does it for what I wanted to. Oh wait, no, there's one more. I have to show this because it's my favorite new little toy.
One more thing.
I hope I'm not going over too much.
Oh no.
All right. So this was just added in the most recent version. I would say it's still like, I should have put like a beta flag on this. It's still a little rough around the edges, but I think that we just need to do a little polish on it. Show-PSEditor is actually an in-console editor that we added in PowerShell ProTools module. So what it does is it actually creates an editor like this. Can I actually make this bigger? No, kind of weird. But it creates an in-console editor. So this is actually using GUI CS or terminal GUI, whatever you want to call it. And so it's cross-platform. It works on Windows, Linux, Mac. It actually works in Windows PowerShell. And I even tested it in Azure Cloud Shell, and it works there too. So what's cool about it is, like you can see, it has syntax highlighting. It also has IntelliSense. So if you were to start typing commands, you can like actually complete things. That's highlighting. It also has error checking. So you can see now we have a little error up on that other brace. And if I were to actually click this syntax error button, you can actually see where the syntax errors are, and you can fix it. The other thing that you can do is you can debug. So you can either press F5 or just click that run button there. Cool. All right, and then you hit F5, it's actually going to run it. You can see it started Notepad, and then it kind of outputs what you would expect to see in like a PowerShell console. We still got to deal with the the escape characters for coloring and that kind of thing, but you can see that it output the Notepad that I started in that variable. So syntax highlight, let's see what's going on here. Like what's weird is the Windows terminal. Like this works better if you use like the direct con host, but Windows terminal like mouse stuff is really weird. So I noticed they have like an open issue to like fix some of that. So sometimes you got like double click to get things to work and everything. But the other thing that it integrates with is PSScriptAnalyzer. So it doesn't do actual analysis, but it at least has the code formatting. So if you press F, well, I think it's Control-Shift-R, it's actually going to reformat your code inside the editor. So I'd say, yeah, it's somewhat useful right now, and I'm excited to kind of like keep adding little features to this because I just like it because it works everywhere. You know, it works in, you know, it probably works over an SSH connection, that kind of thing. So just because it's using standard console like escape characters and VT console stuff. So yeah, so that was my last little toy that we have in PowerShell Pro Tools that we actually added in this most recent version. Cool.
Yeah, for small scripts, or if you don't want to leave the console, it's really nice feature you are added. Really nice.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going for. It's like I don't want this to be like a full-fledged editor, but I want it to be like I want it to be a little more fine-tuned and polished. And once it like works really well, I think it'll be really useful for quick edits and that kind of thing. Yeah, because one thing I don't know. To have search, which is something I didn't think about. But yeah. But that's kind of it for my PowerShell Pro Tools demo. There's definitely a lot of other stuff in here, but kind of what I prepared for today. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to field those.
Any questions? Any comments or so? What do you think about the tool set that Adam has?
I was blown away. I love
Definitely.
so much of this. The stuff in VSCode I didn't even know. It's just it's so impressive seeing the craftsmanship that goes into like every single one of these. You're a super talented person, man. It's really awesome work.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Definitely cool stuff. Do you also can say so? It's so PowerShell Universal is free in some kind of usings, but PowerShell Pro Tools definitely costs a bit. Could you go over a bit? What's the licensing model? What licensing models do you have, and where can you look that up? So
sure. So yeah, all our licensing information is on ironmansoftware.com, and kind of PowerShell Pro Tools has a 14-day free trial, and then from there we have like various levels of licensing. You can buy just like subsets of the tools, and I think those are like $50 a year or something like that if you just wanted the VS Code stuff, for example. And then we also sell the whole suite. And then PowerShell Universal actually has a lot of free stuff. So we do limit the number of jobs you can run per day with the free license, but you can build dashboards and APIs and all that kind of stuff. You can't enforce authentication on APIs or dashboards if you don't have a license, but the admin console itself is always authenticated. So you could potentially stand it up and turn on all the bells and whistles for authenticating users to execute scripts and that kind of thing. So the SQL Server support right now in beta, there is no license limit, but we're going to add licensing to that just because that's a very enterprise feature. So you'll be able to continue to use the LightDB stuff, but you'll need a license for the SQL Server stuff. And we actually have a bundle that includes both PowerShell Pro Tools and Universal for like personal use kind of thing. That's like much cheaper than all the other stuff. So if you wanted to do that, you could, and that gives you 1 year of upgrade and maintenance plus a perpetual license. So you can just kind of continue to use it after that year too. So if you guys want to play with it at home, I know I've actually had like enterprise customers say that they have bought it for personal reasons. They're using it for things like home automation and stuff. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, so we have all those licensing models are available on ironmansoftware.com.
I just pasted the pricing information links for both Universal and Pro Tools in the chat. So if you want to take a look, as you mentioned, you will include or you will charge extra licensing fees on the SQL stuff. Will it be included for customers who already bought the own a license? Or
Yep, it will. Yeah.
Okay.
We're just
Okay.
yeah, if you're already licensed, you're gonna get the SQL Server stuff.
Okay.
So yeah, we're not changing. Yeah, we're adding features, but we're not going to change the licensing model. I think we're toying with the fact of having lighter weight, like kind of edge runners, where you don't have a whole PowerShell Universal instance everywhere. You might just want like an agent that's headless, that kind of thing. And we're considering adding like a lower cost license for those sort of thing.
Nice.
So then you don't have to buy a bunch of like more expensive, PowerShell Universal licenses when you don't need the admin console and everything. So we are kind of toying with that. We just don't have like the technical implementation of those agents done yet. So
like the minimal core only for a lower price.
Yep, exactly. So if you want to just you want to scale out your job runners, but you don't want to like install PowerShell Universal everywhere, you might pay a quarter of the price or something like that to just have another agent. So, yeah.
Just mentioning the price you are seeing on the site is for that what the tool has built in and so on. It's it's nothing. No, so the price is really nice.
Yeah, so, it's funny. For some companies it's nothing, and for some it's not. It's like, wow, how are you charging so much? But yes, I know. I do anticipate like sometime later this year we'll probably raise our prices a little bit, just because I hear that a lot, and we need to support our new support guy. So
definitely. Yeah, and then also one company that I'm working with that are not aligning with the, like I say, faster release cycle. So every 6 months or so, they don't want to pay the whole installation and upgrading and testing and so on. So it's always good to have a perpetual licensing or paying it once and then use it for the next 20 years. So that's what they are doing at the moment. They are on, I think, an unsupported PowerShell Universal dashboard. So they are not even on Universal. They are using the 2.6 framework and so on.
Yeah.
And so where a lot of problems are involved. So yeah, we are just getting there to upgrading.
I'm sure that that's probably not the only software that they have that it's out of support then.
Don't want to say anything about that. So
yeah, well, we have finally, I think we've matured enough that now we have our LTS release out as well. So, one of the big complaints was that when we transitioned from Universal Dashboard to PowerShell Universal, a lot of customers were unable to upgrade just because it was a lot of work. And then they kind of felt, put out. So now we have an LTS release, which we're going to support for the next 2 years. So, yeah. That's
what I think is also cool to mention is this is the thing. So if you are building an API, you have this endpoints PS1 where you have all your API endpoints stored in. And the cool thing that Adam added, I think it was in 2.10, that you can put your endpoint scripts in a different file and just reference it with the path parameter so that you can can get rid of your whole heavy lifting or your whole code, that this gets a bit smaller and more maintainable.
Right. Yeah. It was one of those things where like I'm developing myself and I don't really realize like how large those endpoint files can get. And then I got in a customer call and he had to have like 500 endpoints or something. Just like this huge file. It's like, oh. I think one thing that I realized after I did it though is that it's an endpoint per file right now, which I don't know. It might be good to figure out some way to like group endpoints into like groups of files or something. But
and I was just wondering what you are showing in Universal earlier about the API. How can you say that an API has for one implementation 3 methods? How could you or how should you declare this in the endpoints PS1, or how does it work?
Let's see. I think I still have that. I can show
you.
It's just an array of Yeah, so we just pass in this array here. So
Okay,
your
and
existing endpoints will still work. Like even if
Okay.
you had something like this, it would still work, just because of how
Okay.
the parameter binding would work. But yeah, you can pass in an array here, and then the idea would be that you have to check the method to see what's actually happening inside.
okay,
inside your
so
endpoint.
do a switch statement on the method parameter and then okay.
Yep.
Nice.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? So, Adam, where can people get help? I know that you have a forum or documentations or so that can.
Yeah.
That I will provide the links later in the YouTube video in the chat. So if we have the video out, then find the links down below.
If you're wondering what this is, I made this Visual Studio or this Chrome extension that shows random Magic the Gathering cards.
Nice, nice. I was playing Magic in my childhood, so yeah.
I still buy cards every once in a while, and I have some friends that still play. So, but yeah, if you have questions, definitely go check out the forums. It's pretty active. It's probably one of the best things they ever did was stand up some forums. All the documentation is at docs.powershelluniversal.com. If you are playing with the V3 version, you can hit this little drop down and hit the V3 beta docs. Those are going to be slightly different than the V2 docs, and they're going to increasingly get more different as I add more docs. And then, yeah, all the other kind of resources and stuff like that. If you go to ironmansoftware.com, you can get information. We also have templates, which are kind of cool. Yeah, this is something I should have demoed. I don't know why I didn't do that, but inside Universal Dashboard or PowerShell Universal, you can actually see these templates that are on that page, and then you can import the templates directly into your instance, and it's going to download those files and kind of merge them in, and then you'll end up with pre-built solutions. So a lot of them I built, and then Chris built a couple on computer information, system information ones. We have some Active Directory examples. This PowerShell Universal demo has a bunch of stuff configured just to kind of show you how things work. So if you do want to kind of just pull down those templates, you can. And then there's also tags. So if you want to see templates that have APIs, you can do that, or you can search for templates. So that was one of the things that we always heard was that it's kind of hard to get started with PowerShell Universal. So that's why we have this kind of template feature. So definitely check that out too.
And so if I understand it correctly, if say people don't want to use Git or can't use Git, they can export their environment as a template and go to another server and import that, and they have the same status and all the stuff that they are having on the old server.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So this will actually generate a PSU PKG file, and I mean it's really just a zip that contains the whole configuration, and then you can export it, and then in your fresh install you could import a template. Why that doesn't work? I'll have to check that one out. Weird.
And also that's also really nice stuff. You added full support. I just asked it on YouTube, on Twitter, for the SecretManagement module. That's also really, really nice that you can instantiate your vaults in scripts and run them on starting of PowerShell Universal, so that you have your vault registered, and then you can get through the secrets through the secret global variable to the secrets. That's also a really nice feature.
I guess that's something I didn't really show this time either, but yeah, we actually integrate with all the secret management modules. We're actually using Microsoft Secret Management for people that aren't aware that these vaults that are listed here are actually other secret management vaults. Those are just the ones we include. But if you had a registered secret management vault on here, that would show up here as well. So we just kind of integrate with the Microsoft Secret Management module to do all that.
It's definitely documented in the docs how to do that, to do the whole onboarding and so on. So it's really cool.
Yeah, that was one thing I never wanted to do, was store passwords anywhere myself. So I'm glad I kind of pushed that off into the secret management module stuff.
So, okay, do you have any questions for Adam? Any comments? Any other stuff? Okay, everyone is silent, so I think there isn't anything else. I think we can close the session. I will stop the recording. If you want to keep along, then you can. And yeah, see you next month on our next meeting. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.